All right, diving into some pretty deep philosophical waters today. We're taking on Immanuel Kant, uh, specifically his moral philosophy. Got some excerpts here from the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and yeah, this one's going to be dense. Fair warning. But hey, that's what we do here, right? Break down those big ideas, zero in on what really matters.
You know, what's so interesting about Kant is that he wasn't just trying to give people a list of rules, do's and don'ts. He was trying to figure out, like, the very foundation of morality.
Efficient.
Yeah, I mean, he wanted a system that wasn't, like, tied to any specific time or culture, or even personal desire.
It was like a universal moral code derived purely through reason.
Exactly. And to get there, he brings in this concept called the categorical imperative. It's basically the heart of his whole moral philosophy.
Okay, so where does this categorical imperative come from? Like, what's the starting point for all this?
Well, he starts with this idea that the only thing that's inherently good is a good will. And he doesn't just mean, like, being nice. It's about the intention to act morally, even when it's hard.
So even if someone's like outwardly doing good deeds, but their heart's not in the right place, it's not truly moral for Kant.
Precisely. He even compares this goodwill to a jewel, like it shines even if it can't actually change anything in the world. And this leads him to another, like, really core concept, acting from duty.
Okay.
So to be truly moral, you have to follow the moral law, right? But because it's the right thing to do, not because you're hoping for some reward or, avoiding punishment.
So doing the right thing for the wrong reasons, like, diminishes its moral worth. Like, helping someone just to get praise wouldn't cut it.
Exactly. He argues that your motivation, like, really matters. And this kind of distinction feeds into another key concept, the difference between hypothetical and categorical imperatives.
Okay, yeah, let's break that down. What are these imperatives all about?
Okay, so a hypothetical imperative is something you should do if you want a certain outcome. Like, if you want to lose weight, you should exercise.
Yeah.
It's conditional. It only applies if you have that specific goal.
Makes sense. So then categorical imperatives are?
These are moral duties that apply universally. So no matter what your personal goals are,
Okay.
they come from pure reason itself.
Yeah.
And they bind us, just because we're rational beings.
Okay, so that's how we get to a universal moral code. These categorical imperatives, they're like moral laws of physics. They apply to everyone, everywhere, no matter what they personally want.
You got it. And the most famous way that Kant formulates this categorical imperative is through the universal law test.
Okay.
Which is basically asking, can you imagine your action becoming a universal law without contradicting itself?
Oh, interesting. So, like, if everyone lied whenever it suited them, the concept of truth would just, like, crumble.
Exactly. Promises would become meaningless, trust would disappear, the whole system falls apart.
Yeah.
So Kant says that if universalizing your action leads to that kind of contradiction, it's morally wrong.
It's a powerful thought experiment. Forces you to really examine the underlying principle of your actions. Not just, will this one lie hurt?
Yeah.
But what if everyone lived by that rule?
Precisely. And that leads us to another crucial formulation of the categorical imperative, the idea of humanity as an end.
Okay, this one sounds more, well, human-centered. What's the core idea here?
It's the principle that we should always treat humanity, in ourselves and others as an end in itself, and never just as a means to an end.
Okay.
Like, you can hire a plumber to fix your sink, but you should still treat them with respect, right? Like, recognizing their inherent worth as a person, not just seeing them as a tool to solve your plumbing problem.
It's a perfect example. It's like recognizing that everyone has their own inherent value, like their own right to make choices. Yeah. And we can't just use them for our own purposes.
Exactly. And that ties directly into Kant's third big formulation, the autonomy formulation. It emphasizes the idea that we're free to choose our own moral principles. And that very freedom is what gives those principles authority over us.
So it's like saying our moral compass isn't dictated by some external authority. It's something we freely choose to follow, and that choice is what gives it power.
Precisely. It's like saying, I choose to live by the principle of honesty because I believe it's the right thing to do. Like, that internal commitment is where the true force of the principle comes from.
Almost like we're our own moral legislators, creating the laws we choose to live by. But doesn't that raise some issues? Like, what if everyone chooses wildly different principles?
Well, that's where Kant's concept of the kingdom of ends comes in.
Okay.
Imagine like an ideal society where everyone acts according to the categorical imperative. He challenges us to live as if our actions were laws in that perfect world.
Ah, so even though we have individual autonomy, there's this shared framework, this categorical imperative, guiding us toward a harmonious society.
Exactly. It's like a common ground for ethical decision making, a way to bridge individual choices with a universal moral order.
This is all incredibly thought-provoking. But how does Kant view, like, virtue and vice within this whole system?
His take on virtue is pretty unique.
Okay.
He sees it not as finding like a perfect balance, but as the strength of will to consistently do what's right, even when you're tempted to do otherwise.
So it's a constant struggle to overcome our inclinations and act from duty. Never a moment of, I've achieved perfect virtue, but rather, I'm choosing to do the right thing yet again.
You got it. And vice, for Kant, isn't just a weakness, it's a deliberate rejection of morality, like choosing to act against what you know is right, even in principle.
Wow, that's a strong stance. It really highlights the weight of individual responsibility in his ethics. We're not puppets of our desires. We have the power to choose our path.
Absolutely. But Kant also recognized that applying these abstract principles to real life isn't always, straightforward. He gives examples of duties, but acknowledges that there's no simple formula for every situation.
So no pocket guide to the categorical imperative, huh?
He gives you the framework, the guiding principles, but applying them requires judgment, taking the specifics of each situation into account.
That makes sense.
Mm.
It can't be a simple do this, don't do that system when you're dealing with the messiness of real life.
Yeah.
Are there any specific examples from Kant that illustrate how this works in practice?
Absolutely. One duty that he talks about is the duty to develop your talents. He uses the example of someone who just like indulges in pleasure and avoids any effort to improve themselves.
So like someone who could be a brilliant musician but chooses to, waste their days away doing nothing of value.
Exactly. Kant says they're not only failing to live up to their own potential, but they're also like potentially depriving the world of the contributions they could have made.
That's a powerful way to think about personal responsibility. But what about duties toward others? Any standout examples there?
One of the most prominent ones is the duty to avoid making false promises. He talks about someone who might be tempted to make a promise they have no intention of keeping just to get something they want.
Like borrowing money with no intention of ever paying it back, taking advantage of someone's trust.
Exactly. Kant would say this fails the universal law test. If everyone made lying promises, the whole system of trust and social cooperation would, collapse.
It's not just, like, unwise, it's fundamentally immoral because it undermines the very possibility of a functioning society.
That's Kant for you. The morality isn't determined by whether you get away with it, but by its adherence to these universal principles of reason.
This is so insightful. I'm really starting to appreciate how Kant's moral philosophy isn't just some abstract theory. It's a framework for navigating the ethical dilemmas we face, like, every day.
It really does give you a whole new lens for looking at those decisions, doesn't it? And that's just the beginning. There's so much more to explore in Kant's thought.
Okay, so we've laid out some of the, like, core principles of Kant's moral philosophy, but I'm curious, how does this system handle those really, like, tricky situations where different duties might clash? I mean, life is rarely black and white, right?
That's a great point. And it gets at a common critique of Kant, his focus on these like absolute moral rules. Critics say it leaves very little room for flexibility when we face those real world dilemmas where there's just no easy answer.
Right. What if you have to choose between two duties that seem equally important, but fulfilling one means, like, violating the other? How do you navigate that?
Well, Kant acknowledged this challenge, He didn't think we should just blindly apply rules without considering the context. He talked about the need for reflective judgment, which is basically the ability to weigh different factors, like interpret principles in light of the specific situation, and then make a reasoned decision.
So it's not about having, like, a categorical imperative app on your phone and just looking up the answer.
No, not at all. It's more about developing this kind of moral sensibility, a way of seeing the world through the lens of these principles, but also being able to apply them like thoughtfully in those messy real life situations.
It's like becoming fluent in the language of Kantian ethics so you can navigate those, like, really complex conversations, not just reciting memorized phrases.
That's a great analogy. And this leads us to another really fascinating aspect of Kant, his focus on the internal struggle between reason and inclination.
Ah, yes. Back to that battle between what we should do and what we want to do. It feels like this constant tension within us.
Exactly. Kant believed that this struggle is at the very heart of what it means to be, a moral being. We're caught between the demands of reason, which, point us toward those universal moral principles, and then the allure of our desires, which often pull us toward self-interest and, like, immediate gratification.
Almost like the classic, angel on one shoulder, devil on the other scenario, duty versus desire.
Such a vivid image. And for Kant, it's precisely this struggle that gives moral action its weight. It's only when we resist those really tempting inclinations and choose to act from duty that our actions have true moral worth.
So it's the effort, that conscious choice to overcome temptation that really matters. Doing the right thing when it's easy doesn't have the same moral value.
Exactly. He even suggests that if doing the right thing perfectly aligns with what you already want, it's not really testing your moral character. It's those moments where you have to choose between what you want and what you know is right that really reveal your commitment to morality.
It's like that saying, character is what you do when no one's watching, right? It's those internal choices, holding yourself accountable even when there's no external pressure.
Absolutely. And for Kant, that internal accountability is key to moral growth. It's through those struggles, those choices for duty over inclination, that you strengthen your will, you refine your moral compass, and you become a more, realized moral agent.
So it's a continuous process, not a destination.
Huh.
You're never, done with moral development. It's about those ongoing choices.
Precisely. He believed this struggle between reason and inclination is an essential part of being human. It's through this struggle that we define ourselves morally, we refine our judgment, and we become more aligned with the demands of reason.
This helps me understand his view of virtue better.
Yeah.
It's not about achieving some, perfect state of being where you're never tempted again. It's about developing that willpower to consistently choose the right path, even when it's hard.
You're exactly right. And this focus on the internal struggle also illuminates his view of vice. He sees it not just as a lack of virtue, but as a deliberate turning away from morality.
So not just giving in to temptation, but consciously choosing to disregard what you know is right, putting your own desires above the moral law.
Precisely. It's not a weakness. It's a deliberate rejection of those principles.
This is really making me think about, the profound responsibility we have for our own choices. We're not just, swept along by our whims. We have the power to align ourselves with or reject those moral principles.
That's one of the most powerful takeaways from Kant, I think. This emphasis on individual autonomy and responsibility. We're not just following orders. We're the ones actively choosing to uphold or violate those moral laws.
But this brings me back to a question I had earlier. If we all have this individual freedom to choose our own moral compass, how can there be a shared understanding of what's right and wrong? Doesn't that just lead to chaos?
That's a great question. And it gets to the heart of what Kant was trying to do. He believes that while we each have this capacity for autonomous moral reasoning, the very nature of reason itself points us towards a shared set of universal principles.
So even though we have different experiences and perspectives, there's something fundamental about reason that, connects us and leads us towards those same moral truths.
Exactly. He saw the categorical imperative, with its focus on universalizability and respect for humanity, as an expression of that shared rationality. Any rational being, regardless of their background or desires, would arrive at these same principles.
It's almost like saying there's a deeper level of agreement on morality than we might realize if we all just tap into that shared rationality. But how does he explain the fact that people, obviously disagree about right and wrong all the time?
Well, he acknowledges that moral disagreements are, inevitable. We're complex beings with limited judgment, and the world is messy. He didn't think the categorical imperative would magically solve every ethical debate.
So it's not a formula for, perfect moral consensus, but more like a shared framework
Right.
that we can use to have those difficult conversations and try to, work towards agreement.
That's a great way to put it. He provides the principles, but applying them requires, careful thought, dialogue, and a willingness to engage with different perspectives.
Almost sounds like the foundation for a well-functioning democracy, right? Respect for individual autonomy, but a commitment to finding that common ground based on reason.
It's a great connection to make. Kant's work has absolutely influenced political thought, ideas about human rights, and democratic governance.
I'm really seeing how relevant his ideas are even centuries later. It's not just some, dusty philosophy. It's a framework for understanding those huge questions we still grapple with today.
Absolutely. But there's another aspect of Kant that's particularly intriguing. He actually grapples with the idea that morality itself might be an illusion, a phantom of the brain, as he puts it.
Whoa, that's a curveball. Why would he, a champion of reason and morality, entertain that possibility? It seems to, undermine everything he's arguing for.
It shows his commitment to really questioning things, even his own deepest convictions. He was aware of the challenges to moral realism, the idea that moral truths exist objectively, independent of, human opinion.
So he's wrestling with the age-old question. Are there universal moral truths out there somewhere, or is it all just stuff we, made up?
Exactly. And skeptics have been arguing for centuries that morality is relative, culturally conditioned, or just personal preference. Kant didn't shy away from that possibility.
So how did he address this challenge? Did he ultimately conclude that morality is an illusion?
His response is complex and debated by philosophers to this day. He didn't offer a simple refutation of skepticism, but developed this really nuanced account of how reason, freedom, and morality are all kind of interconnected.
Okay, I'm ready to go down this rabbit hole. What are some of the key ideas in his response?
One of the most important is his concept of transcendental idealism. It's basically the idea that the world as we experience it is shaped by the structure of our own minds. We don't have direct access to things as they are in themselves, only to the way they appear to us.
So, our perception of reality is filtered through our own mental lens.
Exactly. And Kant applies this to morality, too. He argues that the moral law, that categorical imperative, isn't something we discover out there in the world, but something our own practical reason creates. It's not external, it's self-legislated.
So it's not like a divine command or some set of rules etched into the fabric of the universe. It arises from within, from the very way our rational minds work.
Precisely. And for Kant, this is actually what gives morality its authority. It's not imposed on us, it comes from within, from our own rational will.
I can see how this starts to address the skeptic's argument. If morality is rooted in the structure of reason itself, it's both universal and self-created. But how does he handle the fact that reason seems to lead different people to, different moral conclusions?
That's where his concept of the faculty of reason comes in. He believed that, while individual judgments may vary, there's a common structure to human reason that, when properly applied, will lead to the same moral principles. It's like saying there's a right way to use reason, a method that transcends individual biases and leads to, objective moral truths.
So it's not just about having a reason, it's about using it correctly.
Yeah.
There are rules of logic and reasoning that, if followed, should guide us toward those universal moral principles.
That's the gist of it. Kant believed that the categorical imperative is a product of this proper use of reason, and any rational being, regardless of their, individual quirks, would arrive at these same principles if they followed those rules of reasoning.
This is all incredibly mind-bending. It seems like Kant is saying that morality is as fundamental to our nature as our, capacity for logical thought. But doesn't this raise questions about the role of emotions in moral decision-making?
Absolutely, and that's a point of contention in Kant's scholarship. Some critics argue that his focus on reason leaves little room for things like empathy, compassion, or our, gut feelings about right and wrong.
Because in our everyday experience, those emotions feel so intertwined with our moral judgments. We feel outrage at injustice. We feel sympathy for those who are suffering.
You're right. And Kant's emphasis on reason and duty can make it seem like he's advocating for this cold, calculated morality, ignoring all those feelings.
So did he really believe that emotions have no place in moral decision-making?
It's more nuanced than that. Kant wasn't suggesting we become emotionless robots. He recognized that we're complex beings, and our feelings play a role in how we experience the world, including morality.
So he wasn't denying our emotions, but he thought they shouldn't be the, driving force behind our moral choices.
Exactly. He believed that reason should ultimately be in charge. Because emotions can be unreliable, They can be swayed by personal biases, cultural conditioning, even just our mood at the moment.
So how do we, ensure that those feelings don't hijack our moral reasoning? How do we make sure reason is at the helm?
Well, Kant believed that through the cultivation of virtue, the strengthening of our will, we can develop the ability to act in accordance with reason, even when our emotions are pulling us in a different direction. It's like training ourselves to act ethically, even when we don't feel like it.
Sounds like building good habits, exercising a muscle. The more you practice making those reasoned choices, even when it's hard, the stronger your moral muscle becomes.
That's a great analogy. And this focus on virtue, this strength of will, is also a key part of his response to those moral skeptics.
Okay, I'm following you so far, but I'm still not quite clear on how this all connects back to the question of whether morality is an illusion.
Well, for Kant, the fact that we experience the moral law as binding, as something that limits our desires and demands certain actions from us, is evidence that it's not just a figment of our imagination.
So the fact that we even feel obligated to act morally, even when it's inconvenient or difficult, points to the reality of these moral truths.
Exactly. He argues that this sense of obligation, this experience of the moral law as something bigger than our own desires, is a powerful testament to its reality and objectivity.
Almost like saying that the very fact that we can even question whether morality is real proves that it is. If it were just an illusion, we wouldn't feel the need to, doubt it.
That's a really interesting way to put it. Kant believed that this experience of moral obligation, this internal struggle between reason and inclination, is a profound testament to the reality and authority of the moral law.
This is giving me a whole new perspective on the nature of morality. It's not just a set of rules, but a fundamental part of who we are as rational beings.
And that's one of Kant's most enduring legacies, I think. He challenges us to see ourselves as autonomous agents, capable of choosing our own principles and shaping our own moral destinies. But it's not just about individual choice, it's about recognizing those universal principles that guide us towards a just and ethical world.
This has been such an insightful exploration of Kant's ideas. We've covered so much ground, but there's one more thing I'd like to touch on, his concept of the highest good.
Yes, the highest good. This is where Kant brings together the realms of morality and happiness.
Okay, tell me more. It seems like we've been focusing so much on the idea of acting from duty, regardless of the consequences, but isn't happiness something we all, strive for? How does that fit into Kant's framework?
That's a great question. Kant recognized that happiness is a natural human desire. He wasn't saying we should live lives devoid of pleasure or, fulfillment. But he did believe that true happiness, the kind that's lasting and fulfilling, is a consequence of living a virtuous life.
So it's not about chasing happiness directly, but about living in a way that makes you worthy of happiness.
You've got it. He believed that true happiness arises from aligning your actions with reason and the moral law. It's not something you can buy or achieve through external means. It's a state of being that comes from living a life of, integrity and purpose.
It reminds me of that saying, you can't buy happiness.
Yeah.
It has to come from within, from living in accordance with your values.
Exactly. And Kant believed that the highest good, the ultimate goal of human striving, is this union of virtue and happiness. It's not an either situation. It's about recognizing that they're intertwined.
So it's not duty versus happiness. It's recognizing that true happiness is found in the pursuit of virtue. That by living ethically, making choices aligned with those moral principles, we create the conditions for a more meaningful and satisfying life.
That's beautifully put. Kant saw virtue and happiness as inseparable. The more you strive to live morally, the more worthy you become of happiness. And conversely, the more you prioritize happiness over duty, the less likely you are to experience genuine fulfillment.
This is really making me think about how my actions contribute to my own well-being. It's not just about fulfilling obligations. It's about creating a life that's aligned with my deepest values and principles.
That's a profound insight. And for Kant, this connection between virtue and happiness isn't just psychological. It has a metaphysical dimension as well.
Okay, now we're getting into some deep philosophical waters. What does he mean by a metaphysical dimension?
Well, Kant believed that the world is ultimately just and that our moral actions have a significance that goes beyond, this earthly life. He argued that the highest good, this perfect union of virtue and happiness, can only be fully realized in a realm beyond the limitations of our physical world.
So he's suggesting a kind of cosmic justice. Our moral choices matter not just for this life, but for, something beyond.
Exactly. Kant believed the moral order of the universe requires that virtue ultimately be rewarded with happiness. And since that, rarely happens perfectly in our earthly lives, he posited the existence of an afterlife, where that justice and happiness are ultimately reconciled.
It's a fascinating idea. Our moral choices having these, eternal implications. But didn't Kant also acknowledge that we can't have definitive proof of an afterlife?
He did. Kant was a strong believer in the limits of human reason. He argued that we can't have, empirical evidence or logical certainty about those metaphysical realities like God or an afterlife.
So how did he reconcile that with his concept of the highest good, which seems to depend on that idea of a just afterlife?
Well, he distinguished between what we can know for certain and what we can reasonably believe. He argued that while we can't have proof of those things, we can have rational faith in them.
So it's not about blindly believing without evidence, but recognizing that certain beliefs are, like, necessary for a coherent and meaningful understanding of our moral lives.
That's right. Kant argued that faith in God and an afterlife is a postulate of practical reason. It's not a scientific claim, but a necessary assumption for making sense of our moral experience and striving towards that highest good.
This has given me a lot to think about. It's like saying, even though we can't scientifically prove those ultimate moral truths, our capacity for reason and our desire for a just world point us towards something, bigger than ourselves.
That's a beautiful way to capture Kant's thinking. He believed our moral lives have a significance that transcends this earthly existence.
This has been such an insightful journey through Kant's moral philosophy, from the categorical imperative to the highest good, from the struggle between reason and inclination to this idea of a just afterlife. We've really delved into some deep waters.
And I feel like we could keep going for hours, but for now, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've discussed. We'll come back soon to wrap up our exploration of Kant and consider his lasting impact on our understanding of morality.
Man, that was a lot to process. Kant really goes all in, connecting reason, freedom, morality, and then even, like, metaphysics. It's this whole intricate web.
Right. It's remarkable how he builds this whole framework for understanding what it even means to be a moral being. And the thing is, it's still so relevant even centuries later. I mean, people are still debating these ideas, still grappling with these big questions about our place in the world.
Absolutely. So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into Kant, what are some key takeaways, stuff we can actually apply to our own lives, how we see the world around us?
Well, for me, one of the most powerful things about Kant is that emphasis on the inherent dignity of every single person. That idea that we should treat others and ourselves as ends in themselves, never just a means to an end. That's had a huge impact. I mean, think about human rights, bioethics, even how we understand personal relationships.
It reminds me of that golden rule, treat others as you would like to be treated.
Mm.
But Kant takes it a step further, grounds it in this whole idea of rational autonomy and respect for persons.
Exactly. It's not about being polite or just following the rules. It's a deeper moral principle. Recognizing the inherent value of every human being, no matter their achievements, their social standing, or even how useful they might seem to others.
It's so important, that respect for autonomy,
Right.
especially in a world where, people are so often reduced to their economic value or their social media profile or their political affiliations.
Yeah, totally. Kant reminds us that each person is this irreplaceable center of experience with their own unique perspective, their own hopes and dreams, their own internal moral compass.
And that respect for autonomy, that applies to how we treat ourselves too, right?
Right. Absolutely. Kant believed we have a duty to develop our talents,
Wow.
cultivate our rational capacities, strive for, self-improvement, not in a narcissistic way, but because we have this responsibility to live up to our potential as rational and moral beings.
I love that. It's about taking ownership, right?
Yeah.
Not just accepting things as they are, but actively engaging with the world
Yeah.
and striving to be the best versions of ourselves.
That's the heart of it. He's challenging us to see ourselves not as, passive rule followers, but as active agents, shaping our own moral destinies.
It's empowering, right?
Yeah.
We're not just cogs in a machine. We have the power to choose,
Yeah.
to uphold or violate those moral laws. And in doing so, we're actually shaping the world.
That brings us to another big takeaway from Kant. That emphasis on the power of reason. Reason can guide our actions. It can actually shape the world around us. He believed it's not just a tool for understanding. It's a force that motivates us to act morally, to strive for a more, just and equitable society.
So it's not enough to just think about what's right. We have to actually do it. Let that reason guide our choices and actions, out in the world.
Exactly. He saw this profound connection between reason and action. That our capacity for rational thought is inseparable from our capacity for moral choice.
It makes me think about those who fight for social justice,
Mm.
often a great personal risk. It's like they're driven by this deep conviction that reason demands a better world, and they're willing to
Mm.
act on that to make it a reality.
That's such a powerful example, and it shows how relevant Kant still is. He's challenging us to, not just passively accept things, but to use our reason to actively strive for a more just and ethical world.
This whole journey through Kant has been so insightful. I feel like I have a much deeper understanding, not just of his ideas, but of morality itself.
I'm so glad to hear that. As we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought. Kant's work is an invitation. It's a challenge to, engage in that ongoing process of moral reasoning, to reflect on our principles, our motivations, our responsibilities. It's not about easy answers or blindly following rules. It's about embracing the complexity and striving to become more fully realized moral agents.
That's perfect. So to our listeners, keep exploring Kant's work, see what resonates with you, and most importantly, let these ideas kind of spark your own moral imagination, challenge you to think critically and act ethically in the world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Kant's moral philosophy. Keep those philosophical wheels turning.